Hey everyone, welcome back to Grief Out Loud. I'm your host, Jana DeCristofaro. What does it mean to live with an illness that has no cure? To exist in a space where time feels both limited and unpredictable? For Caroline Catlin, these aren't just abstract questions. They're part of her daily reality. At 27, Caroline was diagnosed with an aggressive form of brain cancer, a moment that instantly reshaped her relationship with life, death, and everything in between. In this episode, Caroline shares how she navigates the uncertainty of living with incurable cancer and what it means to hold both grief and joy at the same time. She also brings her unique perspective as an artist, writer, end-of-life photographer, and someone who leads peer grief support groups for children and teens. It will come as no surprise that as a writer, Caroline is very precise in the words she uses to talk about cancer, facing medical uncertainty, and pretty much everything else. Caroline is funny, genuine, and dedicated to making this world a more receptive, understanding, and supportive place for those living with an illness, those facing death, those who support them, and the children and teens left behind. I'm so grateful to Caroline for this conversation, and I'm grateful to you for listening. Caroline, welcome to Grief Out Loud.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
I wanted to ask you this question that I never ask any guest, but I wanted to start with.
Hey, love it.
How are you doing today? And there's a caveat to that question, which is, how has your relationship to that question changed since you received your diagnosis?
What a good question. And the caveat, especially with the caveat. Yeah, you know, my relationship to that question definitely changed in the sense that I became very well attuned to who actually wanted to hear an answer. I think that's a thing that a lot of people experiencing illness or grief or, anything kind of start to pick up on, because a lot of people ask you that, and then a lot of people don't stay, whether kind of presence wise or sometimes like literally enough to hear the real answer. So I think I've become adept at feeling that out when people ask me that. Today, I am feeling very grateful to have my words and to have the ability to talk about things like this and to be present. I think I often forget just what a gift it is and how rare it is to be able to communicate in the way I like to. I think I struggle sometimes with word finding and things since in the last few years, but it feels like such a gift to be able to be in conversation around things that feel really important to me. So I'm feeling very grateful and present and aware of the complexity in the world around us. I'm just happy to be here.
I appreciate that you've developed this sort of sixth sense of who wants the real answer and who doesn't want the real answer. Mm-hmm. What do you usually say when you can tell, like, oh, this is just kind of a toss away question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe something like, I'm doing okay, busy. I feel like I use busy as like a universal way of kind of covering so many things, where it's not doesn't mean what I think it actually means. I think we all do that actually a lot. It's been busy. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of assumptions about what goes with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you want to share with us and me about your relationship with cancer? How did the two of you meet?
My relationship with cancer existed before my diagnosis in a way that was very almost so we talk sometimes in the cancer community, we talk about, and maybe in other spaces, but this idea of grief tourism. Whereas there's this feeling that I think I didn't understand before. Whereas if someone is having a really hard time and there's sort of an element of like tragedy to it, I think there's certain people that are drawn to the story or the intensity of it in a way that is really natural and valid and can also be really harmful. And I think before I had cancer myself, I think I didn't understand the depth of cha life changing it would be to get that kind of diagnosis. I think I was closer on the side of being someone maybe that would show up immediately around someone's diagnosis and then not realize the way something like that follows you through the rest of your life, whether or not you become in remission or anything else. So I first, kind of intimately met cancer in I was 27. This is 6 years ago. I'd been really sick for a long time, maybe 8 years of chronic illness, and nobody really believing me, a lot of misdiagnoses, a lot of fighting fiercely for anyone to listen. Finally convinced the doctor to order a brain MRI, and they found a brain tumor in my right parietal lobe. And pretty quickly after that, had craniotomy, so brain surgery, which resulted in a pathology result of anaplastic astrocytoma, grade 3 out of 4, which is an incurable type of aggressive brain cancer. And I was, like I said, I was 27 when I received that diagnosis.
And it sounds though, I mean, I have this idea, right, that you have some symptoms, you go to your medical practitioner, they are a little bit more worried than maybe I might be, and they figure it out, and then they tell me this terrible news. But you had kind of the opposite experience of you having to really fight to get the attention to even get this diagnosis.
Yeah, I think your kind of summary and idea of what the process is or should be is exactly what it ideally should look like. And I think for some people it does. But I think it's a lot more rare, especially if there aren't clear early signs or clear points for diagnoses. I talk a lot about how my diagnosis gets me in the door to get the type of care that it would have taken me many months on a wait list to get before. And I with similar symptoms, but because there is a code that people can bill for, along with something that's clearly urgently needing care, it's really different. But before that, I had similar symptoms, and I was dealing with this sort of, ocean of issues around pain and cognitive function and fatigue, and but there was no clear label for it, and so it was such a battle to be even taken seriously that something was really wrong because after the preliminary blood test would come back normal, it was kind of like, well, we don't know. Like, your lab work looks great. Brain tumors don't show up generally on lab work. So yeah, it was really, really a battle to get anyone to listen and then to actually be able to order the tests that were needed.
And you mentioned earlier on that you recognized that you would show up if a friend or somebody you knew was diagnosed with cancer. You'd be really present with them, but you wouldn't quite understand what it meant. What did you understand about it differently once you were the one receiving a diagnosis?
That's a great question. I think I understood slowly the way that it would never be the same. Whether or not I was in active treatment, whether or not whatever status my cancer was at, it had transformed my life and my understanding of life and my mortality to a degree that would be with me forever and that I would have a relationship with in a new way for the rest of my life. I think it's easy for us as supporters of other people to be there in the moments of crisis, and that is amazing, and that's what we should do. And I think it becomes less present for us when it's not those moments of crises, and months go by, or maybe years go by, and we don't think about it as friends or community members, maybe as much as the time when it happened, and then but the person who that thing happened to is likely still affected every single day. So I understood that on a deeper level, and I understood because of how sick I was and because of the severity of my cancer, I understood that my relationship with my own mortality, with death as a concept that applied to me, would be present in a different way from that point going forward.
And you were 27 at the time, 27,
Yeah.
28, and many of your peers, I would imagine, in that same age range, were not confronting mortality in the same way that you were.
Definitely not. Mhm.
That might be an understatement. How did you navigate that with your relationships?
Yeah, I think it was both my peers not necessarily having exposure or familiarity with mortality and just the experience of not having at least most of them themselves experienced a body that was not kind of functioning at the top of its ability. I mean, even when you're in your 20s, it's easier for most people to be able to do things like whatever, like stay up late or have drinks and anything, and then be able to go to work the next day or to continue on and with whatever you're doing without having to be sort of rigid about your self-care practices because your body is resilient and life looks different. And I think for me, even before my cancer diagnosis, I had to pay a lot of attention to things like, am I getting enough water? How many hours of sleep am I getting? Sort of the math of chronic illness, starting from age, 22. And it really shifted how I could navigate the world and be social. And I think now that I'm in my, early 30s, I hear, so like kind of 10 years later, I hear my friends and peers and community starting to be like, oh my God, like I have to get more sleep or I wake up and my back hurts or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, I've kind of and then people older than me will be like, just wait till you're 50. And I'm like, I think I've kind of been 50 since I was 20. So, there's like part of that where it's like I actually sometimes I connect more with people in older bodies because I feel like I've had so much similar experience. Um, and then the mortality component, I mean, I think the older you get in life, the more you experience loss, whether that's deaths of people in your life or other types of grief and loss. And I think it was very new to many people around me to the idea of how closely we all live close to death. I think that proximity um, was new, and I think I've been lucky enough to be in the community with a lot of people that spend time within their own feelings and exploring kind of and expanding their emotional vocabulary and a lot of therapists and artists and social workers. And so my friends really, really showed up for me and tried to understand as much as they could.
We talked a bit about like how you and cancer met in the early days of your relationship.
Mhm.
What's your relationship status now, and what's some of the language and wording that you use to describe it?
Yeah, I love the framing of relationship because that is absolutely accurate. I mean, I think my cancer um, when I was diagnosed, I was told that my timeline when I was diagnosed, I was told I would likely live an average of 3 to 5 more years. I just a few weeks ago passed the 6 year mark since diagnosis, and I have been stable since, which is incredible and not at all something I thought would happen. I really, really did not expect to have this many healthy years after my diagnosis. And as time has gone on, the kind of overall understanding of my type of cancer has shifted with further advancements and things like that in research and other types of studies. And so there's more of an understanding that a type of mutation that my brain tumor had is very favorable in the sense that it responds well to treatment. So in the time since my diagnosis, in 6 years, if and when my cancer progresses, it will be classified differently than it was when I was first diagnosed. Which is just to say that it's like relationship makes sense to me as it's this kind of ever shifting dynamic. And I have scans every right now the window I'm able to move between is like 3 to 6 months. I can pick, every 3 to 6 months I need to have scans um, because of how likely recurrence is. I've been going for 6 months between scans lately, which has been terrifying and also so good for me. Um, but it's always there. It doesn't, it's despite they don't, for brain cancer, it's when you're stable, it's sort of more no evidence of disease. There's not really a version of remission for most people. So being in this kind of liminal space, I don't feel like I'm ever not aware of my mortality or my illness.
And so that leads to the terminology you tend to use is incurable cancer or incurable illness.
Yeah, like I'm living with incurable cancer, and I think that has felt the most accurate because it doesn't feel quite right anymore to say I have cancer, because I'm not actively in treatment. I'm not. I think when I say have said I have cancer to people, their next question is sort of, well, are you doing chemo, or like about the treatment itself? If I say I had cancer, or I'm a cancer survivor, people tend to be like, "Oh, great, you're in remission. Like that's amazing." And you know, sort of it feels more congratulatory and final than I think is true. So living with kind of incurable, stable cancer feels like the most accurate term because from what I understand, it has been explained to me that my cancer will recur. It is not possible unless, as many years as I can get is amazing. And also it is like will recur at some point. And so it's always this dynamic of sort of playing with time and time scarcity around the awareness of that. So living with that, living with incurable cancer feels so accurate because it is about living within that space and finding ways to be present and alive there.
Can we talk a little bit more about those scans that you go for every 6 months? I mean,
Hmm.
I'm just sitting with this recognition of like knowing that people have said your cancer will come back. It sounds like
Yeah.
if it does come back, maybe they'll use a little bit different language around it. And also, it'll
Yeah.
still be
Yes.
back. So, how do you prepare for those scans? What is that experience like for you?
Yeah, it's wild that we're having this conversation today because I mean, last night I had a dream which about cancer, which is a really I don't have it come up that kind of present every night anymore, but I had a dream that that my cancer had recurred and I needed to have brain surgery again. But the reason I knew that was because I had advocated to have a scan sooner than my scheduled scans. And I think I'm sharing that to the degree of like, that's how present it is in my body, the scans themselves. Like the dream was less about the cancer and it was more about advocating for the level of surveillance that I feel like my body needs at all times. It was, in some ways, it was easier when I did the scans every 3 months because I felt like I was keeping on top of things, sort of like I knew that if cancer if the tumor was to recur or if there was to be another tumor, it would be caught quickly. But it also meant that I was always in the mindset of how many more weeks till I'm back at the hospital. And that was exhausting. And I think it had to be that way for a bit. But now spreading it out more has felt really helpful in me kind of being able to live my life in a way that isn't just connected to that repeating cycle. The first few years, I used to have open mic nights with my friends before. And that was actually organized by a friend who started it. And it was really sweet. People would come together and read like a poem or play music or something online on Zoom because I finished treatment October 2019 and the pandemic began just a few months later. So for those early years, we do a lot of supportive stuff online. Now I generally just the night before a scan, I'll take some time by myself, Water is a very important thing to me, very healing. So sometimes I will go to the water, go sit by the beach or something like that, and just have a moment of really being present with how close mortality feels in those moments. Uh, it feels like those nights. I really feel like I am sort of standing in that in between space, maybe with one foot in the world I live in and in life and everything I am doing here, and one foot in, this awareness of how close and easily death can sneak up on all of us. And so it's a really, really painful place to be, but it's also sometimes this really sharp and important reminder to me about I don't I don't feel like everything happens for a reason. That's not sort of something I agree with, but I do feel like cancer gave me a lot of clarity around what to pay attention to. And so sometimes in those moments, I feel more aware of what I want to pay attention to than other things. It's like the dial on everything has been turned up. So it's both the fear, but also just the kindness from people around me, the just the reminder of um how impermanent like there's something there about knowing that I leave my house in the morning and I'm in one world and I exist in one reality, and then I go through this very loud machine and I spend the day at the hospital, and then a doctor says a sentence and either my world starts spinning again in the same way or everything changes. And knowing that I am walking into a day where that is possible is a really profound and hard and inspiring isn't the right word, but like centering experience into all the things I've learned.
Can you tell us a little bit about what it's been like for you when the doctor does say that sentence? And so far, the sentence has been no evidence of
Yeah, disease
disease.
or yeah. I mean, I think that it's this weird thing where I think in my neuro-oncologist's world, I am best case scenario. Like I am, 6 years out, minimal symptoms in terms of like being able to generally, function on my own. Um, I finished a grad program, and so he's sometimes like almost casual about it. Like he'll be like, "Your scans look great," and I'm like, "Excuse me, sir, I have spent like, the last week panicking and whatever else, just like anticipating this moment." But I think for that, from that perspective, it's like, of course, you're doing okay. There's no kind of catastrophic change, and that's going to be the case until it's not. And so I think back to, when I did get my diagnosis, we had been told the pathology results would take like 2 weeks to get back. And I had just gotten out of the ICU. It was 6 days after brain surgery. Um, and we didn't know why we were, I'm saying we, because my parents were with me, and we were asked to come to this appointment and we didn't know why, because it was at a different, it's at a brain tumor center, which wasn't specifically sort of labeled or named as a cancer related place at first. And so I didn't know what was happening. We didn't think the pathology results were back. And it was so earth shattering to hear how sick I was, and the extent of my diagnosis and limitations of my prognosis, that I think I'm often sort of on guard towards that. Like it feels like relaxing into the idea of everything being okay is really scary, because I know what it is like to think everything will be okay and then suddenly have everything shift. So I think when I go to the day of scans and everything else, I'm sort of bracing for either it being sort of like, yeah, everything's great, or it being, oh, so we saw something, you know, and those feel drastically different.
I'm imagining you in the sense like walking up to a door and waiting to hear if the door's
Hmm.
going to unlock and you have to walk through it, or if you get to turn around and go back the way you came.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful, beautiful image. I mean, the literal doors of my brain tumor center or the rooms, there's if I always say it kind of reminds me of like the vet because there's a room that is, the clinician room, but then on one side is the doorway, or sorry, there's a room where you have the appointment, right? The treatment room. And then on one side is the doorway to the hallway where you enter, and where maybe the nurse brings you down the hallway to your room. The the clinicians enter through a door on the other side of the room. So they walk in, and then they leave that same door. And I remember the first time that I remember my diagnosis feeling this feeling of like, oh, I just left a world and entered a different one. And now it's just it felt like that passage between things, between worlds almost. With the doctors on like this whole other side, these like messengers of something.
I have a really tangible question for you. So, one of the things I'm aware of, and this is kind of a selfish question, honestly, is because, I watch your posts. I have had friends who have dealt with cancer and scans and things like that. And then a scan happens and it's the best possible outcome in the moment. And then what feels helpful for people, friends and family to
Yeah.
say to you after you've walked up to the door and been told, no, you don't need to walk through it right now?
Oh, what a good question. And I think, of course, it's different for everyone, but I think for me, it's not actually the word someone says, it's about presence. And that sounds, I mean, I wish I could give a more direct and easy answer because this question is so important and makes so much sense. But I think it's about presence of being like, um, I mean, I have a group thread that I specifically use for medical updates, and I'll share what happened that day with my friends, and responses like, "Thank you for telling me um, I'm going to bring my dinner," or "Thank you for telling me I've been thinking about you all day." Sort of, I think, and I think sometimes things like, "I'm so glad, your scans are stable, and I'm so sorry you still have to go back to the hospital. Like you had to be there today." Sort of holding, I guess, the duality and that, and also the feeling of knowing someone is showing up for you and however they can and in whichever ways they can, because there are no easy answers like with so many of these things, but it's something about knowing that you are not alone in that and in the complexity of it. I hope that's somewhat helpful. It's hard to be specific.
Well, I think it speaks to what so many of the folks that I talk to on the show who are grieving the death of someone in their lives talks about, where the words sometimes matter and there are some words and phrases that really don't work for certain people and work maybe for
Hmm.
other people. But again, it's about the energy behind those words and maybe the indicator, the way those words indicate the quality of connection and involvement and willingness to continue to show up.
Yeah, I guess what I'll say is that I think one thing that has always felt really helpful for me that I think people tend to automatically steer away from or assume would not be helpful is times that people have told me their own feelings about me being sick. And which is different than being like, take care of me. But for an example is, a friend that has told me that when she heard my diagnosis, she cried and that she remembers that moment. Because that experience or being someone sharing that experience feels to me like, oh, we were sort of together in this moment of deep loss and fear and rearranging of our world, which is different than someone being like, this has been really hard on me too, and I don't talk to me about this as much. It's sort of like, hey, I'm there with you. I'm standing next to you. Um, and there's been, even when I was first diagnosed, the first time I saw my therapist, she just held my hand and cried with me. And as someone that works in mental health, so many messages around, don't take up the space yourself. But there was something so beautiful about that, about both of us showing emotion and her just being like, this sucks. This really, really sucks. And I think things like that and moments where people don't shy away from the reality, which is not exactly answering your question, but there's this, I think about this time, the first I can think very clearly and feel like in my body, the first time after my diagnosis, someone verbally acknowledged to me the severity of it, without shying away from it. And it was one of the most important moments to me in sort of the entire experience.
It seems like what you're speaking to is hearing how people are impacted because you matter to them is a lot
Right,
different than I'm impacted and now I'm upset and sad because you told me this hard news and I can't handle it.
right. Like I care enough about you that this matters to me too, because of how much I want you here and around and present. I think it's the difference between empathy and sympathy, really. Like I'm here with you in this versus, oh, I'm so sorry that you're doing that. You're experiencing that. Yeah.
So you have a unique vantage in that from your own personal experience of living with illness, of the community you've built of other people who are living with illness, and then the youth that you support in your professional role running peer grief support groups for kids who've had
Yeah.
someone die. So you have kind of a unique vantage point to look into the grief that people experience when they're living with an illness and the grief that people experience when someone in their life has died. And I wondered if you could speak to what you see as being really similar or if there's things, aspects of that that you see that are really different.
Yeah. I mean, I think it starts with when I was in the ICU. I remember walking around, I mean, very slowly walking around the hallways with my giant, walker and belt and all that kind of fun things. And I remember passing all these rooms and thinking about all the stories there. And as a writer and an artist, I think about story in a really broad and expansive way as sort of our interactions with the world and ourselves. And just, I remember thinking about the levels of grief that were around me then, how interconnected and unique it felt. That led me to really walk straight directly into the fire of grief work and loss and mortality and all these things because it felt to me so familiar and also so different at the same time. And I wanted to, I think I both wanted to feel less alone in those worlds and I wanted to make others feel less alone. I started volunteering as a critical care and end of life photographer, and I've done that for 6 years. And that led me to my work. That feels like maybe the biggest intersection between things because I am both supporting grieving people, in that moment at the end of someone's life, and I am there for the person that is dying. Doing work at the healing center and leading these kids groups. From a professional standpoint, I love it in the sense of I believe in what we're doing. I believe that it is helpful. I've seen kids and teens connect in a way that I can almost like as if their like healing and connection was literally in the air. Like I can see these moments that are really deeply life-changing for them as well. So I think part of it is I just really believe in that work, and part of it is as someone that is so close to illness and death and mortality myself, it almost feels like it feels like I'm almost like passing on the type of care that I hope I receive someday, and that I hope everyone in those sort of situations receive, or that I hope my loved ones receive. It doesn't, transactional isn't the right word, but it feels like this sort of like shifting and circling of energy around caring for people in that space. And I think my experience of anticipatory grief makes me feel very close and comfortable with kind of the darker parts of grief and loss because it doesn't scare me. It's something I already spend a lot of time doing and thinking about. So I guess all these different pieces intersect in a way that feels like I'm able to give the amount of myself that I can and feel supported by self in my giving.
You seem to be somebody who touches into the sense of something. So, like the way an experience feels or sounds or looks. And I imagine that comes from your work as an artist and a writer. I'm curious if you have a sense of the difference in the way grief feels and looks. And I don't mean from like people are crying or not crying, but like the actual sensation of it. When you're sitting with folks or supporting folks who are living with an illness versus sitting in a group with kids who have had someone die, does that grief feel or look or just have a sense of being different?
Mm. I think when I'm with people who are facing a life-limiting diagnosis, and when I am in that world myself, the grief feels, I described it once as like a giant, sort of like purple cloak. It's like present and it's really immediate. For at least I'll speak for myself. It feels immediate, as if you're sort, it's like all there and present and in everything. Because I think when I was diagnosed, I didn't have that feeling of like, I mean, when people talk about like your life flashing before your eyes, I didn't have that. I was much more like aware of all the things I was about to lose. So I thought about things like movies I wish that would come out in a few years that I wouldn't get to see. So it was almost like this future vision of all that I would lose. And because it was in this space of in between and anticipation, I think I felt I felt the grief of the anticipatory grief of the people I would be leaving, like my family and my loved ones, and I also felt my future. And I think when I work with people in that space, it's like this immediate consolidated heaviness. And I think when I work with people that have had someone in their life die, it's it shifts more of a moment to moment because there's so many different sort of ways of processing that grief in the moment, especially if it was unexpected. I think it's a different thing to anticipate loss and then experience loss than to all of a sudden lose someone. And then kids is like its own thing. I mean, I feel like I'm sort of jumping around, but like I love working with kids because their grief, if I was to describe their grief in a sensation or a color, it's like these little like different, it's like they have different colors kind of all the time around them, and it swirls and shifts, and they're so in each one of them. They're so present and fully in that one, and then it changes to something else, and I learn a lot from that.
I really appreciate you delving into that, Caroline, because it reflects back what I perceive when I'm at Dougie Center and our groups for families who are living with an advanced serious illness, our Pathways program, our meeting. There is a palpable density and tension in the air. I'm not in those groups. I'm just walking through as they're like
Yeah.
leaving their group. There's a density and a tension that, not to say there's not tension after someone dies. I would never say that. But the grief feels more diffuse, even when it's super acute. I don't know how to describe it. It's like it goes everywhere, and then as you were talking about kids, I picture like puddles all over the street with the iridescence, and then people are going in and out of these puddles of different sizes and different depths. And sometimes you don't know how deep that puddle is till you step in it. And then sometimes it's just a little one that you jump over. So I really appreciate you kind of going on that adventure with me of trying to put some words to these experiences.
Yeah, I know it. And hearing you reflect that, I think the difference, the important factor here is actually time. Because there is so much time scarcity when you're someone who knows you're going to die. And it's like, how do you fit in everything at once? Like that anticipatory feeling of the density is like, oh, I have to pay attention to walking down the stairs in this moment. And when I see my child again, like it's so acute. And then I think for people who have had someone die, it's like almost the opposite, where it's too much time sometimes. Like this feeling um of permanency and being within this space that doesn't make sense. Time doesn't make sense in the same way. You know, grief shifts how we perceive time in so many ways. And I think when I imagine it as colors or senses or a visual thing, it's that I think changes the dynamics for me.
Now, of course, I've got words coming to mind, or I think of when there's that time scarcity, it's like a grasping, like trying to hold on to and embed as long as possible and as deeply as
Yeah,
possible this experience, this moment, this word, this look, this hug. And then when someone has died, there's almost a clamoring to reconnect with this thing that has been lost and to try to remember it or to refeel it in some way.
right. Yeah, I mean, I remember there's moments that I have felt. I have a card on my desk that says you have enough time. Because something I struggle with all the time is the feeling of like, oh, I'm not making the best use of this hour because it's a limited resource. I remember feeling this sense of standing in a room where there were clocks on every inch of the wall, and they all kept going off at random times. Like I think that's what it feels like to me to be in this anticipatory grief. And while I'm doing that, I'm also supposed to be like, I don't know, doing the dishes and like walking the dog. And I wonder if I was to perceive it from the perspective of someone who has just had someone die, it would be like maybe there's like one clock and it keeps changing where it is in the house.
Hmm.
And you have to keep looking for it.
I love that. As we come to the end of our time together today, speaking of time, what's one care practice you're turning to a lot lately for yourself?
I started to garden and I'm not very good at it, which is great. Um, like I like ran out the other day and was like, it's frost. What do I do? You know, it's like things in the bed in the dirt. But it's been so healing for me to like nurture something that is about like regeneration and growth and like that actually I think, you know, gardening, like you kind of have to give it time and you can't rush it and you can't put that panic of do I have enough time on it because it will take the time it's going to take. And anyway, it's just been really nice, the tactile like experience of planting things and everything else. And I don't know if anything will grow, but I am having a great time. So that's cool.
And I appreciate the idea that it's like opposite action of what you feel that. And it's like you
Yes.
can't make those carrots grow any faster. They're going to grow. They're going to show up when they show up, if they show up, depending.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. It's not something that is easily controlled and I can do what I can and see what happens. Yeah.
Well, Caroline, I know you do a lot of things with a lot of different people on a lot of different platforms. So for listeners who are thinking, what does Caroline do and where do I find them? Like, how can people find you?
Yeah, I have a website. That's my first name and last name, so carolinecatlin.com. That kind of has other interviews, things I've written, things like that. And then I have my Instagram that is specific to sort of my experience around illness and grief and loss. And that's at my body of water. And I think the other thing that feels important to mention is that I offer grief-related writing workshops a lot and generative grief writing workshops. And I am always happy to help someone if it feels inaccessible for any reason to make sure you are able to access it. They're generally online and, you know, sliding scale. So I'm happy to talk to people further about that. You don't have to be a writer to be welcome there. You can kind of show up however you are. So would love to offer that to various community members.
Well, thank you so much for those resources and listeners. I'll put them all in the show notes, of course, of how you can connect with Caroline with writing and imagery and also the work that you do at the Healing Center working with kids and teens. So thank you so much for I keep saying the word time and then laughing to myself about it, but thank you for making time to have this conversation. I really enjoyed talking with you today.
Yeah, you're so welcome. And this feels like such a valuable and good use of that limited time. So thank you for having me.
And listeners, I say this to you each and every time, but thank you for being part of Dougy Center's Grief Out Loud podcast, for making the show mean something. I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at griefoutloud@dougy.org. It's dougy.org. That's our main website where you'll find information about our local peer grief support group programming, all of our free downloadable resources, including tip sheets and activity sheets, and of course, each and every episode of the podcast. Always excited to share that the show is sponsored in part by the Chester Stephan Endowment Fund. Grief Out Loud is a production of Dougy Center, the National Grief Center for Children and Families in Portland, Oregon. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us again next time.